Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a very kind of a topical discussion about surviving and thriving, optimizing your career during interesting times. And I'm very, very delighted to be joined by three very esteemed speakers, Alfred, Gill, and Deanna. For those of you who don't know, Alfred is a Hong Kong solicitor who qualified in 2000, and he's co-founded his own firm, Hugill Ip, in 2018. He's also a member of STEP and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, as well as being a notary public. Alfred has been recognised in Chambers and Partners Asia, has also received several awards for recognition of his community service work, including the Gold Award for his free will initiative. So very pleased that Alfred is able to join us.
Thank you.
And also we have Gill. Gill, many of you will know and seen in other occasions. Gill is a seasoned legal professional, having joined the MTR in 2004. She's responsible for the provision of commercial legal support and looks after all aspects of the MTR's business. She's also the legal committee of the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce and a member of the Standing Committee on Company Law Reform, as well as being president and fellow of the Hong Kong Institute of Chartered Secretaries. So welcome, Gill. And then also on the panel, we also have Deanna. Deanna is the founder of DeLab Consulting Limited that offers legal consulting services with an IP focus. Prior to starting her own consultancy, Deanna led the Greater China practice of a large international firm. And prior to joining us in the law, she was also a management consultant. Is currently a professional executive coach. So welcome, Deanna. Thank you for joining as well. So to kick off the discussion, I wanted to kind of have a discussion with our panelists about what they think is the differences between the current pandemic situation and the previous kind of economic ups and downs that we've kind of all had. And I had Kieran prepare a slide for us, because when we look back over the past decade or 2 decades, we can see that Hong Kong has been through a lot. Asian financial crisis and the economic and social impact of September 11 in the US, SARS, of course, great financial crisis in 2007, and now we're dealing with a kind of a worldwide impact. So I'm going to open it up to our panelists to ask them for their thoughts on how does this current situation kind of compare to these previous situations?
Shall I kick off, maybe, Davyd, just
please do,
thoughts, and I'm sure the others will chip in. I think COVID isn't quite like any of the previous kind of more cyclical downturns that we've seen in the economy. I think it really came as a huge shock to just about everybody. I remember my last overseas trip was to Europe in February, and at the time my European colleagues were really interested about what COVID was all about and how it was impacting people in Hong Kong and China, because it was seen as being very much the same as SARS, and of course it's turned out not to be. I think it has affected the entire world in a way that perhaps and it's interesting, we called 2007, 2008 the global financial crisis, but I think COVID has really impacted, beyond the reach of the GFC, and it's affected everybody. I think a couple of points for me that are particularly different. One is that I think the recovery from COVID is far less certain. So I think after previous financial crises, there's been a sense that the world will return to normal, but we just won't know quite when that will be. Whereas I think with COVID, for me, both the shape and the timing of the recovery are far less certain. So while it's affected the entire world, obviously certain industries have been hit much harder, so airlines, hospitality, and I think we're not really quite sure what and I don't like the phrase new normal, but what the new normal is going to look like. So I think that uncertainty is something that we haven't really seen before. And I think the second thing for COVID is actually the personal impact that it's had on people. So in addition to dealing with the day-to-day stress that we all deal with, people are worried about family members who they might not be able to see. They may be in care homes, they could be overseas. People are worried about their own kind of mental health and physical health. And so I think that COVID has had a personal impact that's been much broader than any of these previous crises that we've seen.
Deanna or Alfred, do you have any thoughts on how this?
Sure. Yep, I'll take. Yep, I'll take the next one from Jill's comments. So yeah, I think I echo a lot of Jill's comments. Definitely, there's a lot of uncertainty, but I also spent a bit of time talking to one of the head of Asia in an international firm literally today. And yes, there are definitely a lot of uncertainty about it, but at the same time, the uncertainty is also different from the previous global financial crisis, when with the GFC, it was the fundamentals that were of an issue. Whereas with COVID, in many ways, you know, rightly or wrongly, it's actually people are trying to do actual business. People are still trying as much as they can to find new initiatives, to look at new things to do, notwithstanding COVID. So the fundamental economic environment is slightly different than the global financial crisis. Now, in terms of the predictability, however, I agree the predictability is much harder to predict. And one can say that as a result of that, the recovery can go either way. And as we've seen in some countries, the bounce back, from the figures anyway, does appear to be a rapid bounce back. For others, it will probably take some time. But I did want to outline that there is definitely that personal toll part that does mean that we all have to try as much as we can to be upbeat about the uncertainty that could flip either way, for better or for worse. Yeah.
And for me, I have seen through all these crises, and but this one is particularly different because it fundamentally changes people's way of life. And to me, I believe that it presents opportunities. We see how internet changed our life. And I believe that in 1997, if we're talking about organizing a Zoom meeting like this one, people would think that it is like from the other world. But people are getting used to it. And I think this presents a very new opportunity to change things around for anything that is impossible in the past become possible. When people are very used to corporate environment with a very clear hierarchy, corporate management, control, and all this, this COVID pandemic actually presents an opportunity for people who want to try something different, who have more flexibility into arranging their life and cope with the corporate world, in the sense that they now have more time to work from home, they can spend more time with the family. That is particularly the case in the Western countries when they generally need more time to commute. The effect is less obvious for Hong Kong when everything is so close, and people tend to have little room at home to work from home and present another set of challenge. But that actually connects us with the outside world, making conference like this very feasible and available. And how it changed the world, of course, nobody has the crystal ball. But actually, this presents an immense, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for people to try something different. It's just a matter of having the knowledge and courage to move forward. David, you're mute.
Thank you. I think that's very, very true. Given that we've all spoken about the uncertainty of this crisis, I mean, can you share a little bit about how you've gone through the previous crises, and you know, how do you get through these times of great uncertainty? I think, in particular, if you don't know how long it's going to last, and it's been so encompassing. Whereas I think if you look back over the previous occasions, they've been localized in either time or place to some extent. But I think as Gill and others have mentioned, you know, this is a little bit open-ended still after, you know, almost a year now. How did you kind of get through previous crises, and how do you think what advice would you have to get through this current crisis? Do you want to start, Alfred?
I will start first. I still remember 1997, I graduated from law school. 1998, I started my traineeship, and that was the first crisis. And then 2003, I was a 3 years qualified lawyer, and I lost my job during that SARS crisis. And going to now, I'm now an entrepreneur. I can only say that having gone through all these crises actually helped shaping me into who I am and my current practice and my business. And I'm immensely grateful for what I have gone through. And I'm very privileged that I now understand that what is important in my practice, and I can use my skills and knowledge to the best benefit of it. And to those who are going through this crisis, I would say, first of all, believe in yourself, believe in what you have and your strength. Never lose sight of your virtue and your value, the practice, the training that you have received, and how you can make the most out of it. Be confident, even though you're meeting a stumbling block, it actually will get better. And look back in future, when you're looking back into yourself now, you'll be grateful. And don't lose hope. I think that is very important, hope, to go through any sort of difficult time, especially when I help my client going through their own difficult time in terms of family dispute or estate dispute. I think that is very important.
Thanks for sharing that, Alfred. So has it kind of made you more a more rounded lawyer, or it's managed your expectations about your career, having gone through a situation where SARS has caused you to lose your job and then you have to kind of start again?
For me, going through all this crisis means that there's nothing that is handed to you. Working in a corporate environment, you're expected to do your job, going back to the office from 9 to 6, do a job, and that's all. But as soon as the corporate is undergoing a restructuring, you can be retrenched. And that is not the level of security that I have. Hence, I realized the importance is to have my own client base and attract my client base through the knowledge and skills and experience that I have, and convince them into engaging our services. And that, I think, is more secure to me, rather than in any sort of environment when I might lose my job. And actually, that helps a lot for me.
Very, very wise. Thank you, Alfred. Deanna, did you want to share your experience with us?
Sure. Yeah, happy to share a couple of things. Okay, so one of the things that I've spoken to a few people in the senior in the industry is their feedback has been, always how do you strive through the previous recessions and the rest of it. The key thing about this time, I think it is also different, is that there are loads of people in the industry that want to help to the extent possible in terms of helping some of the lawyers up and coming with some of the decisions they want to make, looking at alternatives and genuinely wanting to help. And I think that has come through stronger probably this time round in terms of people wanting to help than previously in those other crises. If anything, because of the personal toll it's taken, as Gill has said, it does mean that there's a lot more empathy out there. So that's the opportunity that I would say is very important. And to those of you who are thinking of how to actually go through this period, there is a lot of help out there to the extent that ask for it and see where you get. Now, in terms of previous recessions and how we get through it, and I think it's all different for everybody. But I found that, at least during the time previously, it was always helpful to sort of say to myself, actually, in fact, I do that all the time. What's the worst case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? And you'll find out if you really drill down to it, it's like, okay, but you really sit down in a logical way, ask yourself, well, what is worst case scenario? You actually think, okay, this is actually all right. Let me sit down and work things out. And in fact, I've spoken to a lot of people and they all think, oh, the earth is falling down. But if you really ask them, actually, let's run this through. Let's just not stop at, oh, the world's terrible. Let's just read through what is going on at the moment. So worst case scenario is what? And then they'll say to you, oh, worst case scenario is I have to move into a smaller flat.
okay, well, was that really that bad? So if you pull it into perspective and actually walk yourself through that process, hopefully you'll feel slightly better about it in terms of pushing through sort of adversity or recession. Also, the other thing is adapt. Hong Kong people, at least in Asia, we adapt super quickly. And if you just push that aside and go, you know what, let's move on. Let's just get on with it. You'll somehow figure it out on that whole adaptation front. And sort of that's sort of how. Also, obviously, pick positive people to the extent you can to be around you. And you know, you have positive people that are probably completely unrealistic, but then you have also positive people that are slightly more realistic about the world, and you might be able to sort of somehow draw from each other in terms of support. And that's one of the things. Also, more importantly, I'd like to encourage is for the lawyers to actually talk to non-lawyers where they see things. Okay, and you'll see that different people from different industries are looking at things completely differently. Some are positive, some are negative, some are even excited. So just canvas all of those opportunities to the extent you can. And that sort of falls into the later discussion, I think. And I'll pass it on to Gill.
Thanks, Deanna. I'll maybe share a kind of personal story. So I qualified, I won't say exactly when, but a few years before Alfred.
You were very, very young.
You're too kind. And I had spent some time in Hong Kong as a trainee, and I'd always wanted to come back. I kind of fell in love with the city, but I was relatively sensible at that time. So I thought, look, I'll go back to London, I'll get a few years under my belt, and then I'll look to come back to Hong Kong. And in that intervening period, my law firm closed its office out here. And I was talking to a couple of other law firms, and then with the Asian financial crisis, I guess, you know, moving into the late 90s, early 2000s, people sort of said, look, this is, you know, we really enjoyed the conversations with you, but we're just not hiring any corporate lawyers at the moment. And so I think a few things, and I'll explain kind of what happened next. But, you know, remember that these things are business decisions. They're not personal. It wasn't firms saying to me, Gill, we don't want you. It was just that at the moment, we're not hiring any corporate lawyers. And I think sometimes it's very easy to take these kind of messages or these kind of decisions very personally. I think it's really important to remember that these are business decisions. They're corporate decisions. They're not personal. And I think the second key message is really around kind of agility and that willingness to change your plans. I've never personally been a believer in having a life plan or even a 5-year plan. And I hate in interviews when somebody says, you know, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because so much can change in that time. And so when at that time I couldn't come out to Hong Kong, my law firm knew that I was sort of unsettled. And so they sent me on secondment to a railway business in the UK. And it was a railway business that had just been privatised. So at 4 years qualified, I went in as the general counsel to run a team of lawyers who'd all worked in effectively the civil service for 20 plus kind of years. And I went in there thinking, my goodness, you know, how on earth am I going to run this team? How am I going to win the support of these people that know this business and have just been around so much longer than me? And I learned a huge amount, I have to say, through that role. And I ended up staying there from 3 months to 6 to 12 months. And it was after that all of a sudden this opportunity came up with MTR in Hong Kong, because at that time MTR was looking to expand globally, and so was looking in the UK and in Australia for lawyers that had a corporate background, but also, you know, ideally a background in projects and in the rail industry. So, you know, had I come out to Hong Kong when I'd originally been planning to, I'd probably have stayed in private practice. I don't know how long I would have stuck it out. But actually not being able to do that, you know, meant that I went this slightly circuitous route, but went into Metronet in London, and then was sort of perfectly placed to come back to Hong Kong with MTR. And I remember at that job interview, my boss then, at the time, said to me, "So why do you think, kind of, Gill, this is, you know, you're the right person for the role?" And I said, "Well, look, you know, you've printed my CV here in the Times. Of course, it's right for me." And I think I was much better prepared then at that stage to come back to Hong Kong, and I've been, you know, fortunate since then to have this fantastic career with MTR. So I think, you know, don't be too stuck in your plans. You know, your career is incredibly long. I think when you're young, it sort of seems like the next few years are it, and if it doesn't work out, you know, as you planned, it's kind of disaster. And as Deanna said, actually, what really could go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? Could you change your route? Could you take different opportunities, take risks with roles that you might be offered that perhaps you hadn't thought were for you, and you never then really know what's going to come next after that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jill. And I think you've segued us perfectly to the next point that I wanted to raise, which is, certainly given that recessions do happen kind of every 10 years, and your career will, a lot of the audience, their careers will be 20, 30, 40 years. But it's sometimes hard to see yourself kind of, what you're going to do in 30 years. And so if you were faced with a situation kind of immediately where you're not going to be retained as a trainee, or maybe you're a junior lawyer and, they have to let staff go. What is the kind of, what should they be thinking about in the short term, and then a little bit in the medium term? Because I guess the situation is also that unlike other times, you can't take a gap year and, like I did, travel in South America or something. Do you think there will be a problem if they have a gap in their CV for anywhere between 6 months to a year?
Why don't I kick off and then we'll go back down. I think if you're going to take a break, I would say find something useful to do with it. I like David took, it seems like several gap years, or certainly gap periods in my life. But I think, if travel isn't possible, what can you do? And I've just finished myself an 8-week course on business sustainability management with Cambridge University, which, had I been able to travel as I normally do with work, I'd just never have been able to do. And so I've used the opportunity of having a little bit more downtime to do some further studying. So I think whether it may be pro bono work, whether it may be some volunteering, whether it may be additional studying that you might be able to do, people in the future are going to remember 2020, and they will understand why perhaps your career didn't follow the path that you were expecting at that time. But I think if you can show in the future that you use that time kind of wisely, sounds a bit patronizing, and I don't mean it to, but think about what you could use this time for, how you can make yourself a little bit more rounded, as I think David was asking Alfred, did you feel more rounded from that experience? What is it that you could learn during this time that you could then take back kind of when the opportunities do come up? But I'd say also it goes back to that point about a long career. I remember as a trainee lawyer in London, we had a rule in my law firm that if you went out for lunch or dinner or to the pub, then trainees didn't pay. And as a good Northern English person, I was always used to paying my own way. And I used to kind of fight at the bar with the partners to say, let me pay for drinks, let me pay. And they said to me, Jill, there will be an awful lot of years when you are the one paying. Your traineeship is a really short time in your career. And that's something, that you realize as life goes on, that you do have a long career. And so, don't worry too much about the long term. We are going to rebound as an economy, as a city, as a world from this. And so I think just, think about the short term, think about what's ahead of you, think about what you might be able to do to just, make yourself, when times do get better, make yourself seem like a kind of rounder, more interesting person who will then be really ready to take those opportunities.
I cannot agree with you more, Jill. A lot of time, a lot of people do not know how to explain why there is a gap between their career. If they only just say, oh, I just want to get a gap year and try to figure out my life. And then my follow-up question would be, have you figured it out? What is your conclusion? And a lot of time, they do not have an answer for it. If that is the case, and you said, I might appreciate a more straightforward and honest answer. That is, during this time, I have been looking for a job. I haven't been able to find any because of the environment. But at the same time, I've done this and this and that actually opened up myself into other opportunities, and how I make use of this time to reflect on myself and things like that. I think don't worry about taking the gap. Most important, find a good reason and take the most out of this gap.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Talking about the gap year, I think all the panelists have already said the gap year. Obviously, you can't travel, but that's not the end of the world. There are loads of things. In fact, one of the things I did ask was, in fact, another partner in one of the big firms have said, take the opportunity, do some volunteering work if you are able to, and appreciating not everybody is able to, and actually do some volunteer stuff that's worthwhile to you, be it a legal focused one or otherwise, as long as you can explain it these days. In fact, someone who has taken a more interesting gap year could actually be more employable than someone who has had a normal career, because there is no normal anymore. So don't let just the fact that this is not normal, nobody takes a gap. No, that's no longer the case. There is no normal. So whatever it is that you think you need to take the opportunity to do it. Think of the times where throughout your entire career, you really haven't had time to really do something that you really wanted, because everything has been on a schedule and you have had to fulfill that schedule, and everything was planned and you had planned it. So the opportunity to actually sit back and go, you know what, I am able to, notwithstanding having thought about financial commitments, etc., I am able to give myself a little bit of a break and figure out this is what I want to spend and I consider as worthwhile. And provided you are able to support that with a really robust discussion in your next CV discussion, it would end up even possibly being one of the reasons you were recruited. And it just depends on where it goes. And you can't really project it now, and there's really hardly much point to it. So one of the partners, a couple of things, a couple of quotes I like to quote from relevant partners. One of them said, at the moment, it's like a pinball machine. You don't really know where you're going to end up. It's literally ping ponging, and it's a pinball machine. So just go with it, and you don't know what slot you're going to end up coming out of. That's number one. The other one, which is reflective of what Gill was saying, is from the first day I was a partner, I was told it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And for you guys who are starting, pace yourself, because life is going to throw whatever it is it will to you, and treasure this opportunity if you can. One of the worst things that I won't like to see out of this situation with COVID and the crisis is that I don't actually want to go back to business as usual, because it's probably not bad that business is not exactly as usual. And it's probably okay for partners' careers not to be as usual either. And it's probably something that everybody will need to embrace from all walks, including lawyers and otherwise. So yeah, that was my two cents worth.
Right. Thank you all for sharing that. I think you're certainly right in that, unlike other kind of times, the whole world has been affected. So am I right in saying there's no stigma in being honest about this, either with future employers and obviously with yourself as well, that, this is an unusual year. And as you said, Alfred, everyone will know 2020 or what happened in 2020. I know particularly for perhaps younger lawyers, it is sometimes a bit embarrassing or to explain why you were not retained. Do you think there's any kind of difficulty being honest this time? I think personally, I think there's no stigma in it, because it's such a tsunami of unexpected consequences. I think often my approach in interviews, and certainly I appreciate when I'm interviewing people, is that you just be honest and say the firm was going through a tough time and they couldn't retain everyone. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and what I'd like to say is, I bet you, if some of you look back at this 10 years from now, you'll be damn happy and damn grateful that you weren't retained. So that's the only thing I want to say. You just don't know, and I'm pretty sure if you look back at it now, 10 years from now, you say, oh, thank goodness I wasn't retained. And if you ask any of a lot of the successful entrepreneurs out there, loads of them are telling you that. So I couldn't agree more. I think this is the time, as Gill has said, I mean, it's understandable. You look at the CV, even back then, we looked at when the global financial crisis CV, we understand what's happened, and that's a given. And this time, way more so than back then, than any of the other crises.
I think it's understandable, but at the same time, I think it's more important to understand what is the reason given to you when you were not retained, and is there anything that has to do with the firm or you, and how you get in terms of this message, how you improve yourself in terms of future career. Let's say, for example, I want to be a litigator, but they don't have a seat for the dispute resolution department. It's totally understandable. But then that also can give a message to the future employer that is, I know what I want to be in future in terms of a lawyer, in terms of building my legal career, and I'm determined to go forward with it. And also go forward and explain why you want to be a litigator. Because of certain characteristics, because of your aim to help people to go through a difficult time, whatever reason that would be, actually that would be a very good justification for you to go to the direction in terms of your career.
So would you recommend, Alfred or Gill, if you want to chip in, then not changing practice areas just to get a job if you don't have to? Because I know, Gill, you said you should try other opportunities, and I think you know, the industry itself has changed, and you know, when I went in-house, I was already about almost 10 years PQE, but now you can go in-house a lot earlier, and also there are a lot of these new kind of well, they've got new law like Axiom or Peerpoint, or maybe you can even do some paralegaling or something unrelated to law and compliance. What is the advice there? Should you be open to, you know, if you are you know, a corporate lawyer doing litigation, or litigation if there's an opportunity in different practice area, maybe wills and estates with Alfred, would that be kind of the go, or should you stick to your knitting, as they say?
I think it probably depends. It's a good lawyer's answer, isn't it? I think it depends on a few things. Probably one, how far through your career you are, and probably the more junior you are, the easier it may be to sort of move around and change around. But I think it also depends on how determined you are to sort of follow a particular path. So Alfred, you know, is giving the example of somebody who knows they want to be a litigation lawyer, and actually it may then be a good thing for them in their future career to say, look, I didn't have that opportunity with the previous firm, so you know, this is what I've gone away and done, and I'm now kind of back here knocking on your door again. I think equally, you know, other areas have much more of a sort of crossover. So the commercial, corporate, project-y type areas, you know, it may be sensible to go into, you know, I spent a lot of my early career as a corporate lawyer, but focusing on PPP, PFI type projects, but from the sort of corporate angle. So I think where there are opportunities like that, where perhaps you're not completely giving up the area you're interested in, but you could just approach it from a different way. Certainly in-house is absolutely an option. And you know, you talked about, might you take a paralegal opportunity rather than an NQ job? I think absolutely, if that gets you some experience in your chosen sort of field, it gives you, really importantly, I think all of those opportunities give you an ability to build up your network. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, when things start to get better, and I know we'll probably touch on the challenges of networking during COVID, you know, that's what you want, is someone you can pick up the phone to, somebody who will remember, you know, oh yeah, Deanna came in and did that paralegaling for me during 2020. You know, I'm now looking for an IP lawyer. I might pick up the phone, or when she gets back in touch with me, you know, you remember them. So I think, you know, it does depend on what level you're at, on how determined, how sure you are about what you want to do. But yes, you know, keep your eyes open to those opportunities.
I completely agree with you, Gill, and keeping an open mind is actually very important. My personal experience is that I started off as a litigator, and then I broadened my practice with the non-contentious probate and estate, because it's also involved court work. So going to court seems like my job, but then the non-contentious probate part has nothing to do with litigation, actually. But without opening myself to that, I wouldn't become a probate lawyer, and I wouldn't become a contentious estate lawyer with the experience in both non-contentious and contentious work. And that highlights the importance. And actually, especially when a lot of people do not like doing probate work because they find it boring, they find it very difficult dealing with the court. But I'm very glad that I have this opportunity, not shutting off the opportunity to learn the non-contentious probate work. And now I turn into a full probate lawyer. So keeping an open mind is very important. And at the same time, knowing why you are willing to try another area of practice, that helps justify why you take this course and whether it is suitable for you and what you can get out of it, irrespective whether you go back to the previous line of practice or not.
So this could be an opportunity to try different things and broaden the skill sets. What kind of skill sets do you think people would be working on during this time if they have been let go, or even if they haven't been let go, but they've got a lot more time because they can't travel? Gill, you've done a course on yourself, and I've seen some other universities offer open courses now to the public during this time. But what are the kind of key skills or characteristics that you'll be looking for in terms of hiring? Maybe we can give the audience some pointers.
For me, I will be looking for someone who has the drive and hunger. I think that is very important in the difficult time to maintain the stamina and the determination to build up a career. And that is particularly the case in a difficult time, that you cannot expect anyone to hand you any work. And everything that you earn will be coming from you. And in that respect, when we are talking about private practice, we're looking at how to attract your client, how to make your client knows that you are there, available, and you can provide the service that they need at the time, and how you differentiate yourself from a competitor. And in that respect, making people known by building up a contact network, as Gill just said, is actually very important. Even though there's a social distancing rule, it doesn't stop you from going on to Zoom and initiating contact, pinging people and say, oh, I'm still around, I can help and all this. And especially in this time, there's no excuse actually. If you do not have the skills to be at ease at a social occasion, if you do not have the habit of ringing up anyone that you know before, this is the time for you to go back and do this. Don't be shy from taking all these steps, because that shows your determination of proactiveness in navigating the situation that you are going through, and your eagerness to acquire clients. I think that is the best time for you to demonstrate your skills, and then what we'll be looking for as a new lawyer.
Thank you for sharing that, Alfred. Gill or Deanna, what kind of skills would you be looking for someone or what skills rather should they consider working on during this period of time?
Right. So one of the things that I've always encouraged younger lawyers to be, and this sometimes is not as easy as I thought it would be, is curiosity. Okay, genuine curiosity about how things work. And whatever the thing is, to be honest, obviously you have to go with whatever your passion is and whatever you're interested in. If you are not genuinely interested in it, for me to say, go do a whole course on Bitcoin or do a whole course on blockchain, you have to at least be able to explore it, to say, you know what, I'm genuinely interested in that. Let me find out more. But that has to be a step. And then once you find out, oh, actually, I'm interested in it, then you will gradually explore it, as opposed to having a prescribed list. These are the skills that I'm looking for. Obviously, the substantive legal skills are definitely important, but you have to be genuinely interested with the passion that we've all mentioned today, because it shows through. If you just did it because you wanted to run through the motions, A, you don't enjoy it as well, B, you can't really explain it, and C, you sort of at the end say, oh, well, I thought it was relevant, that was why I did it. But whereas if you took the time to actually pick something you genuinely are interested and you are curious about, be it an industry, be it a skill, it will come through when you talk to people about it. And then moving forward, I also want to say is, while as we all think historically is about the legal knowledge, yes, the legal knowledge is highly important, but in the new age of practicing in the legal industry, as we all know, the legal skills are a given. It is the other skills, knowledge in the industry, knowledge as to how things work, the advisory role that we all have to play. That only comes with exposure from multiple facets. And so restricting, to a prescribed list sometimes would work. Obviously, AI, technology, blockchain, those are very key development areas. But whether or not there is actually a lot of chemistry in other industries is actually very important. And one of the biggest things I think a number of those that have been on some of my courses will know, I always talk about Davyd Wilkins. He's one of the best known professors in Harvard on the legal profession moving forward. His way of thinking is, for the biggest challenge for the legal profession moving forward is actually collaboration. And when he talks about collaboration, he's not talking about within the firm. He's talking about horizontal, vertical, everything, just collaboration. And one of the things that has been identified as a key area where lawyers don't do as well as other industries is because of that collaboration doesn't happen as organically as naturally because of the way we practice. So going back to what you were saying, the answer to the question, I think be curious, go for whatever you think you are passionate about, or just spend time exploring what you may be. That's sort of what I had.
Thank you, Diana. Gill?
Yeah, it's great. I love both of those answers, and I'm going to have to get Deanna to explain what Bitcoin and blockchain really are to me, I think, at some point in the future. One of the smartest pieces of advice I've ever been given, and it's one that takes a little bit of explaining, is kind of not to be a pointed object. And I think sometimes as a lawyer, it's very easy to focus just on your legal skills because they do give you a seat at the table. They give you a reason for people to come and talk to you. But I think that's really not enough. And Alfred talked about broadening his legal skills out from dispute resolution to kind of wills and estate. Because you can imagine a client of the firm comes in and maybe you've been dealing with a dispute for them. Suddenly they want a will writing and you say, well, sorry, we don't do that. That's not great. But I think it goes beyond legal skills as well to actually, it's Deanna's point on curiosity, having an interest in what's going on in the world, whether that's in economic issues, whether that's in ESG issues, whether it's in, just different aspects of life. Because I think if you just rely purely on your kind of legal skills, you're not going to be the sort of person that people want to work with, that people think of, to pick up the phone to when they've got a need. And so the lady that gave me this advice actually worked in PR, and she said she used to make herself read Nature magazine, every month, because it was just something totally outside of her sphere of kind of expertise. And she felt it just gave her that slightly more rounded perspective on life. And so I think for me, that's really important. The other thing I would say is, and maybe it's particularly relevant in-house, but a willingness for people to roll up their sleeves and get stuck in. In-house, we don't have that same hierarchy that sometimes law firms have, where certain work gets given to the trainees, the next level of work gets given to the associates, and only the really exciting stuff kind of comes up to the partners. There are certainly times when if there's no one else around to review an NDA, I have to do it, and you just roll up your sleeves, you pick up your pen and you get on with it. And I think that willingness of people at all stages of their career to be interested, to learn, but just sometimes, what is it that needs doing? Let me do it. It doesn't matter if it's my job, if it's writing a pitch, if it's, say, marking something up, if it's proofreading something, just be helpful to the team that you're working with. And I think that goes an awfully long way.
And Gill, I can assure you that even in law firm nowadays, we don't have that kind of hierarchy that people will have. Oh, dump the donkey word to the trainee. No, we don't have that. You're expected to roll up your sleeve and do whatever you're expected to do, and no excuses. And that, I can assure you that. And I also completely agree with you over the having the curiosity and expanding your scope, because actually also relates to the human skills, social skills. Having a really interesting topic to talk to the people that you may meet for the first time, expanding your context, staying relevant. That actually goes to how you're becoming a lawyer in future, because the interpersonal relationship become very different. In the past, we talked about phone calls, meetings. Now a lot of time is on the internet, on the social media and WhatsApp. Now, actually, I do give a lot of advice on WhatsApp, and I cannot stick to like a piece of letter or a note on advice. I cannot do that because actually clients expect a very quick turnaround time and expect solution. And at the same time, in order to be relatable, you need to have a decent conversation with the client. And in order to do that, you have to know what's going on with the world. A lot of people don't read newspaper. It's no longer acceptable. You have to know what's going on around you and have your point of view. And that is very important nowadays. You cannot just stay in your room and read a book and expect that the world revolves around you. That's not going to happen.
I think you've raised a very good point, Alfred, as well. Is you know, how you relate to people is becoming increasingly important, and I think we've touched upon it earlier as well. This might be a good time to practice those skills, but how do we do that in an environment where we can't, you know, I can't have a coffee with you because of these restrictions? Do you have any tips on how we can network in the age of social distancing?
I think first of all, start brushing up on your skills in the, relating with people. Friends are always the first good starting point, but then you can expand on meeting friends of friends. Just go out and meet more people. I mean, even with the social distancing rules, it only means that, for example, nowadays the restriction in sport. All you take is to ask your friend to bring one friend that he's very good with and you've never met. Expand the circle. You know what? The time that I met the most number of people is special occasion, weddings, funerals. And not that the wedding is happening anytime, but then you can
funerals.
Expand the circle. So not trying to make any skill. Oh, COVID, nobody is going out, so I'm not going out. It's not going to be acceptable.
Deanna, go on.
You sure, Jill? All right, okay, I'll go first real quick. So, okay, so yes, you're right. There's a lot of COVID restrictions, and as a result of that, we all feel a bit, you know, restricted. But actually, if you sit down and actually think, there are a number of people that you said you would catch up with over the years, and you've always said, oh, let's grab a coffee, let's do whatever, okay? And just to reach out, to send an email to see how you are, this is a perfect time to do that. Yeah. And the other thing and this is a perfect time, they could always say, oh yeah, it's not great. Or they'll say, actually, things are okay. Would you like to come out for coffee? And you never know until you try. And the other thing is also on these virtual webinars, I've met literally a number of people over the past few months that I have followed up with, and they are willing to meet. And you just don't know. And during webinars, especially actually, this is one of the things, and it's not because I teach at the Law Society, but it is part of that. Those breakout rooms that we put people in as part of the webinars, as part of your CPD points, small groups, and you actually have a perfectly normal conversation about a particular topic. And whether or not you're able to use the opportunity to get a connection in order for you to follow up, that's a very small example of an opportunity to network. Within the firm, obviously, there's loads of people that you probably haven't spent that much time talking to. For example, the BD lady who does your pictures. Have you spoken to her lately? How are things going? What's happening with them? Or the translation person that's been helping you, or whatever it is. You don't know that. And I think one of the things that I was told today was the default switch of no has to be switched to yes. Whatever the default was previously, that gives you a reflex to say, nah, they won't do it. Just swap it and say, you know what, it's going to be a yes switch. Let's just try it, okay? Because the worst case scenario is what? They say they can't meet because they've got a baby at home and they don't want to. That's okay. Again, that's no problem. So to be able to sort of to have that mindset to say, you know what, my default's going to be yes. Someone asked me to be a paralegal, sure, I'll do that. And in fact, it was spot on. I started as a paralegal in Hong Kong. And that's exactly it. Someone asked you for something, the default should be different. Someone's asking you to photocopy, go do it. Someone's asking you to be an intern of a particular company that you think maybe in the good times I wouldn't even bother. How do you know you're not going to enjoy it? And just swap the default and then say, okay, let me think about how this could work. And I think that's part of the COVID new way of challenge, I suppose. Jill, over to you.
I think that's right. I think, you know, in COVID, Hong Kong is always a place I find where people are very generous with their time and with their contacts and to help people. It's one of the great things about the city. I think that's even more so during COVID, you know, and if you go on LinkedIn today, so many more people are being open, you know, about the fact that they're reaching out for work or they're sharing a post from a friend who is looking for opportunities. So I think, you know, absolutely do that. And I think, you know, practice it, kind of set yourself a goal of reaching out to somebody. I remember when we first started doing these Zoom calls, I find it quite difficult presenting like this, where you can't see feedback from the audience because you don't know how things are coming across. But gradually you sort of learn how to get your settings right so it feels a bit more comfortable. So I think, just practice it, reach out to somebody. Maybe they won't respond, but somebody will. See how it goes, see what works. And I think also, which goes back to the point we were all making about curiosity and being a rounded object as opposed to kind of pointed, but that point about authenticity. If during COVID you are now the best baker of oatmeal and raisin cookies, of any of your friends, then kind of don't be afraid to talk about those things. If you've taken up yoga, you're not expected to become an expert in these things. And I think sometimes we put a bit too much pressure on ourselves that we should be using this time to become an expert. But, be prepared to talk about the things you've tried while you've had this bit of extra time, because I think that authenticity really comes across.
Thank you, Jill. I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the great things that I've, just to share, is that actually a lot of people have reached out to me on LinkedIn, people I don't know. And I think it's been a wonderful experience to just talk to them and get in touch with how they see the world. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this seminar, is because a lot of people did reach out to us on social media. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, Jill, you're absolutely right. Everyone here is very generous with their time, and certainly when in the past I've had to ask strangers for help, they've always helped me, and I love to return the favor. So even if people don't respond, there's generally, you shouldn't take that as a personal rejection. But 90% of the time I find actually people are responding because they're at home like you are and they've got a lot more time.
There, you're mute.
I'm conscious of the time, but I did want to do a very last, very quick poll. It's been a really wonderful discussion and we've got a lot of good ideas. But I do want to ask our audience and our speakers to do this poll. And are you kind of optimistic about the future? Kieran, can you put on the poll? I want to see if the audience is as optimistic or not. All right, while you're doing that, we've actually got a question as well, from the audience. So I'm going to ask it, and perhaps one of our panelists can help. A trainee who was about to qualify into a corporate practice at a renowned local firm, then 9/11 happened, and the position was no longer open to her. She ended up becoming a personal injury lawyer for the next 15 years with much lower income. Should she have waited it out and got a job as a corporate lawyer instead? If yes, how long should she have waited? That's a very, very interesting question, kind of looking back or using someone else's anecdote. Does anyone want to have a stab?
I certainly wouldn't say yes, she should have waited, she or he should have waited it out. I think, regretting, looking back on the past and regretting the path that you chose at that time, gosh, we all do it, but I don't think it's the right way to approach life. I think, the question now should be, okay, you've been doing this for 15 years. What might the paths be for you kind of going forward? You made the choice at that time based on the information you had, based on the environment at that time, based on what you needed at that time. And so I think, be proud of what you've achieved over the last 15 years, be proud of the people that you've advised. And I'm sure you've helped, in some really tricky personal injury cases, and then think about what might be next for you.
Yes, I completely agree with you, Jill. I find this question very sad because it seems to suggest that the person who's asking this question is not happy with what he or she has after so many years as personal injuries lawyers. And I don't know whether that person would be happy if he or she had the opportunity to go back into corporate practice, because corporate practice actually is also very stressful and very time consuming. He or she may make a little bit more money, but then is it what happiness comes from? Life is too short. And looking at all the people who passed away in my practice, I realized that some of them do have a very good and enjoyable life, and some of them don't. And that is what I tell myself every day. I don't want to end up leading a miserable life. And I hope that nobody within this seminar would have such a life that they don't want to live there.
I think I'll just there are no right or wrong decisions, I don't think, in life. You are faced often with having to make a decision. And I think sometimes, you make a decision at that time, as I say, based on the information you had, on the environment, and you've just got to then put your heart and soul behind it and give it your all. I don't think it's as Alfred said, it's not as simple as, one of them being right and one path being wrong.
Agree.
Yeah, I think I'm absolutely in agreement with Alfred and Gill, because I'm totally 100% sure. How do you know one would have been happier? One could have been way worse. And there's no point in seeing that if you kind of think, if only we should have and could have. In fact, I think exactly, you've made the decision, you're not happy with it, or you're happy with it, regardless of it is the present, that you either figure out if there's something you want to change or whatever it may be, and it's forward looking. And I think that's the main message. There's no, and I know I sort of said, if you look back, I think there are people that moving on will see this as an opportunity. And I think that's sort of where we want to end things at, right?
Yeah. There's just one more, two more very short questions, but just to close off on the discussion, I think I agree with you all. The problem with life is that you can't compare yourself to what could have been. Should I have married my ex-girlfriend or whatever? You can never always look back and think about what might have been. There's no guarantees in corporate. So I think that's something that you probably should not worry about looking in the past too long. Another question that's just come up is, should I join LinkedIn to find a job? As all of us are on LinkedIn, I'm going to take that as a big yes. Unfortunately, the world is becoming more and more social media focused. But unless you have any comments on that, panelists, I might skip to the last question for tonight. And it's a very good question, actually, from a corporate newly qualified lawyer who wants to switch to funds. How might they do that in this environment, given that funds is a very specific area and apparently only done by top firms, according to the question? What would you suggest? How could they skill up in a totally different, in a different area?
Okay, I'm not a fund lawyer. I'm not a corporate lawyer. But if I were that person, I probably would first of all understand the practice area. What is it requires? What sort of deal would be like to set up a fund? By trying to talk to the fund lawyers, meet more fund lawyers, and then after knowing that practice area, proactively approach to the fund lawyers and say, I want to be in. And don't take no for answer. Keep working, keep looking. Don't be shy, and try to see. If this time you don't have a response, try again and try again. Try that until you make an opportunity to have a meeting, be it as a job interview or coffee.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think from your current base as a corporate lawyer, there are different types of corporate law. If there are any sort of finance deals that you could work on from the corporate side that might give you exposure to the kind of people that you need to talk to, then kind of push your current supervisors and the partners, other people you're working with, to try and let you just start to shift in that area, because I think that gives you the best chance of doing exactly what Alfred just outlined.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
exactly
and if
right.
there's any consolation, I actually did over the past 2 years, there's exactly a junior lawyer that was incredibly interested in IPIT, and over the course of the past 2 years, I've seen him do exactly what Alfred has said. He was consistent in his approach and speaking to different lawyers in terms of connections, asking to people to make introductions, having a coffee, and not hounding those people, but just keeping in touch, being aware of what's developing in the area and what are the new topics. And in the end, he has landed with a traineeship for the particular area that he wanted to do. But it did take him a good 18 months, but he didn't give up. It was making connections, one introduction to the other, kept on that while he was at work to the extent he could get exposure to those deals. It was exactly that. And just be patient. No one's gonna, it's gonna take a while, but just be patient and just have faith and believe in yourself. I think that's really it, is it?
And I think that's the message, consistency, faith, and keeping going. I mean, the other thing that you might like to do is join industry associations. There are obviously like the Fund Lawyers Association. There's basically an association for every type of profession or interest or subgroup. And you don't actually need to be qualified in that area, because they do have associate memberships. And that will at least give you access to that group of people. And then you can network with them and you can understand more about that sector. And also sometimes just putting that message out there, you never know who might hear it and say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so, or you might go and talk to so-and-so. Look, on that note, I know we've gone past time because it's been such a good discussion. As there are no other questions, I'm going to thank the panelists. Kieran, do you want to show the poll results? The climax is whether people think, optimistic about the future or not. Ooh, 2/3 are very optimistic about the future and 1/3 is not. So on that note, thank you everyone for participating. I hope we can move that up. But thank you, Gill, Alfred, Deanna.